So the Voices of War and Peace First World War Engagement Centre was set up in 2014 by the Arts Humanities Research Council. So there were 5 centres in total funded across the UK, all based in universities, working with research networks across the country, made up of academics, cultural partners and community organisations and other practitioners in sort of heritage and arts and culture. Each of the centres was set up and had its own particular set of themes that it looked at, and we were all established to work with community organisations, primarily those that had been funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, to support them in all sorts of different ways in terms of their projects.
I think for the AHRC it was about trying to shift in some ways the way in which academics work. The academics work outside the academy and work with communities and civic society mediators and so forth. In some ways generating data that maybe the Treasury would take notice of in terms of numbers, success and so forth, showing you do have a social and economic impact from humanities research. The engagement centres came into being when the AHRC put the call out, which was in 2013 to start in 2014. It's interesting that data 2013 because it's in the immediate aftermath of the warm glow of the Olympics, when Britain was demonstrating to the world in some ways what a multicultural society can be. In 2019 in my city, which I think is a very stable multicultural city, there was a series of attacks on mosques in Birmingham, and that was deeply shocking in a city where, yes, there has been racism, but yes, there's a lot of people recognise that racism must be challenged. It seems deeply disturbing that that fragmentation, that divisiveness, actually translated into very outward set of feelings that are unacceptable in our society. One can notice in that period, because of the debate on Brexit was so divisive, it seemed to allow people to articulate things they may have thought but not said before. They probably were there in 2012, but they were kind of hidden in some ways because we were being celebratory. The commemoration made us look inward rather than outward. And by looking inward, you then surface, I think, some things about, why we are special and, and how our country is changing and so forth. We finished the project in December 2019, and in January 2020, we leave the European Union, which in some ways has been, for the last 40 odd years, 50 years, a barrier to conflict. That is a lesson to be learned.
Our centre was based here in Birmingham, led by the University of Birmingham, and I was actually based in the Library of Birmingham, so it's been another sort of partnership project between the university and the library. Because the main focus of the project was community engagement, it made more sense for the coordinator to be based in the city centre, in the biggest public library in Europe, where we could access meetings rooms and spaces where we could hold events, and it sort of went towards breaking down those barriers between community organisations working with universities. As we were getting off the ground, we ran a series of events to explore the themes that we were interested in. We didn't really focus on the military history side of things. We were more interested in the experiences of women and children, how war impacted on cities, injured soldiers that were returning to Britain after being involved in the conflict, and wider sort of issues around commemoration as well, and how we remember wars and how we commemorate them.
So in terms of the way in which all the centres were set up, you have a lead person who would be the principal investigator. Each centre is made up of other academics who have specialist knowledge, who want to engage and work with communities, and each of those people is called a co-investigator. In the Voices Centre we had 9 co-investigators, that's 9 academics, but we also were quite unique in that we also had a community co-investigator, Peter Glasgow, who represented the Peace Pledge Union, and it's very important to have another view on what the past looked like.
I think it's becoming a more militaristic society, and that is something that the Peace Pledge Union is very, very unhappy about. We're very worried about it. That's why we welcome being part of this particular project and welcome the opportunity to get our voice heard. As
part of the criteria for becoming a centre, you had to have a research network. which meant you reach out to other academics who have a similar interest as what you want to do in your centre. And so you create a database, and all those people were put on our website. There were over 50, and therefore they were available to be contacted by community groups in terms of working with them.
I just went around to all sorts of different events that the HRC put together. For example, the Common Ground event. I gave many papers at different places that other centres put together to talk about, again, my interest in how could we better engage with Britain's colonial history. So I'm from Lebanon. I got very interested in exploring, as part of this project, how did the peace agreements that came out of the First World War basically affected contemporary conflict in the Arab region.
These research centres have been great at bridging the gap between academics and, you know, amateur researchers and communities and you know, the average man and woman on the street, and that has been part of the focus of the research centres, and I think that has worked well. It has allowed academic thinking to feed into the community groups, and it has also allowed for some of that amateur research to be fed into the academic narrative.
It's quite a symbiotic relationship, and I think we all need each other, and we all realise that we all need each other, and the expertise that comes with that, whether that's academic expertise or community-based. But I think there will be lots of organic and informal partnerships that take place and continue as a result of that.
So the centres were set up to work with community organisations that had been funded through the National Lottery Heritage Fund's First World War programme, which was called Then and Now. Working with community organisations differed vastly, so some I would have very sort of minimal contact with. The Lottery Fund would point them towards us if they needed perhaps help in writing their funding application or accessing research or resources. Then we might have a bit more involvement with some groups, so I've helped support events that they've been doing, either being held here in the library or elsewhere. We'll do promotion. We had quite an active website and social media presence as well, so we could use those to help groups and projects if they needed it.
In terms of the support that the Voices of War and Peace Centre provides us, the website is fantastic. It gave us a little hub for promoting the project. The mailing list that the centre's set up and also the social media activity was really useful in getting the word out about our activities, about the exhibition. I think even earlier in promoting the research that we were doing, which meant that we had inquiries coming from all over the country about, you know, what are you doing? How can we learn from your work? Can we come and check out the exhibition? We had about 17 projects that we funded that were all collaborative, all co-designed with a sort of equal partnership between the academic and the community group, and then were co-produced and produced a sort of variety of outcomes from exhibitions, research guides, films, drama productions, all sorts of different things.
Secret City Arts attended a Voices meet-up session where we were introduced to Paul Long and Nick Webber from Birmingham City University, and that began a really excellent and long-standing collaboration. We wanted to see if our films had a life beyond the original project that we had done, and we said we'd also really like to work with some archive footage. And he said, "Have you heard of Mace?" We said no, and then we were presented with a whole range of different films that we could have used around our subject of commemoration, and then we found the perfect one, the Alfreton film. And the film's amazing. Because it doesn't focus on the parade, it focuses on all the people that are around, so that the children and the young people that we worked with just connected because they could make links, because it was real people, it wasn't formal. So it was a very special bit of footage. So we brought groups to BCU and they watched the Alfreton film there, and we did a workshop around the way you remember publicly, and we took our film into their settings and did a session on how you remember privately. So we brought lots of groups that came in there, oh, university's not for me, and they left going, oh, I wonder what subjects I might do. It was just like light bulb moments. So that I think the funding provided so many different outcomes that just went far beyond, you know, learning about World War I.
The whole agenda about public engagement with research is much more high profile. The role of civic universities, their responsibility to their communities around them and so forth. That's a language that is now increasingly commonplace. Institutions are interested in meeting the agendas that go with civic engagement and public engagement.
The Voices Centre has broken down barriers by introducing community arts organisation to academics and academic institutions and get their work out into the community and for us to support what they do.
One of the issues we found is there's a need to recognise that a community is made up of individuals who have other commitments, work commitments, who taking time out to do something on a day when you're putting an event on means their wages might be, might be earning and so forth. Understanding the way communities actually can engage still needs to be, I think, unpicked and understood.
The Voices Centre has felt really accessible and like that they were really trying grassroots on the ground to make things happen.
The intention was for the centres to have a geographical reach as well as a thematic reach. We funded the project in Edinburgh, but also some in Manchester and in Cardiff and in Oxfordshire as well. So I was in constant contact with them, but also towards the end to do some quite in-depth evaluation. With quite a number of them, we went and did actual interviews with the lead academic and the lead community partner. And we also held sort of group discussions as well, where I would go and sort of record the comments and then collate all this data. We ended up working with a group called Disability History Scotland, so based in Edinburgh. They had a great idea for a project and we really wanted to support them to do that project.
Dr. Jennifer Novotny, Sash Callahan from DHS worked with citizen researchers to explore the Scottish history of the National League of the Blind March in 1920.
A secondary aspect was to actually look at the lives of blind people in Scotland at the time, so that there was a kind of historical context to why people were marching and what the conditions were that people were living in.
My research was mainly in military history, and this was very much a civilian story, which was really nice. I thought that was very attractive to me on a professional level, to really inform the research I was doing. This was a nice counterpoint to that. When I met with Disability History Scotland, I was really taken with how welcoming and fun the group was, and it was just a group of people I wanted to work with.
They had to send in a formal application to us to access the funding. The form had to demonstrate that the project had been co-designed and that it was going to be co-produced. Each of the projects that we funded has been funded up to a maximum of £15,000, so it's a very small amount, and the bulk of the money was really intended to go towards a community organisation, so there's a little bit to buy out the time of the academic or the early career researcher.
What I ended up doing was coming in as the academic on a freelance basis, and we made it work, and I have to thank Disability History Scotland for being incredibly flexible with that, and the University of Birmingham for stepping up. I'm so glad that I was part of this project. I would have been so sad to have let it go.
Had it been left to us to do it all, as a group, we would have struggled. Not because people don't want to put in the time and commitment, but because we simply didn't have the knowledge and skills that Jen did, and they were the things that actually helped us to start the thing. That was a major factor in the success of the project.
This is the kinds of projects that we should be funding as an engagement centre, so it's been an important part of the work that we've done. It's been great to see it come to fruition. Yeah, so the Stories of Omission project, we started in about 2017, I think it was, working closely with Gary Stewart, who leads an organisation called Recognise Black Heritage and Culture. We've been working with him pretty much actually before the centre was started, so he was part of the First World War network that existed in Birmingham.
Believe it or not, I was actually a soldier. I was in the British Army for 7 years. Uniquely, whilst I was in the army, I had no idea that black servicemen had actually served in the First World War, so it was completely new to me.
There is some information about the involvement of black soldiers, but we were quite interested in the things that were being left out, so hence the title Stories of Omission. We wanted to know how black soldiers were being described, perhaps in things like the newspapers, and we could see that there were gaps and that potentially the full story hadn't been told.
We're also looking at the implications of why the Caribbean took part, what implications it had on the Caribbean. 16,000 men actually came and fought here and were so badly mistreated at the end of the war. And we don't seem to have any acknowledgement of these stories.
So we worked with a number of volunteers. Some of them stayed with the project from the start to the finish. Some of them weren't able to for sort of various reasons. They found areas of research that they were interested in. We were able to help them access things. You know, it can be quite difficult if you haven't done research before to find out where things are kept. Gary led a group of them on a trip to the National Archives, which I think was really useful for everybody. It taught me that it is difficult, that you can't always keep volunteers engaged in a project from start to finish, that people will drop in and out. But it was really worthwhile in terms of the stories that we were uncovering and the research that was being done.
I'm taking part in the project because I wanted to be involved in something which was quite meaningful, would be giving back to the community and learning more about the journey and experiences of black soldiers from across the globe really, and being able to be a part of a project that highlights them as an individual and tells their story and how that will have an impact on, you know, future generations really.
There was a mutiny that happened in 1918 in Italy that involved a number of soldiers from the British West Indies Regiment. And this was seen as a terrible thing. You know, there was a mutiny and they behaved badly and they were court-martialed. And it often seemed to, if the stories were being told, they were often from a sort of negative perspective, and the contribution of black soldiers was not being celebrated or commemorated in quite the same way.
For me, one of the admissions is looking at black underage soldiers of war and compiling a list of these. What I'd like to be able to do is plot a map of where they actually travelled, try and find out some of their experiences. These were children, as well as being black, so it's sort of like a double blow. I'd imagine there are quite a few soldiers out there that weren't even given a medal of recognition. That needs to happen and can still happen now.
My grandfather was in the Second World War, and in all honesty I had absolutely no interest in the military, in the war. I just was against all war, and I suppose I didn't really understand what was involved. And through listening to Gary's interest and enthusiasm about the war, it's made me look at it differently, and I've got a newfound respect for my own family members and their experiences and input in it.
And we've got a really lovely booklet that we produced. There's lots of questions in that booklet, lots of areas for further research. So I think just with all of these collaborative projects there are lots of challenges, and I think we've tried to have a bit of an intervention into those, but I think there's more to be done, certainly.
But we're learning all the time about what it requires to get out there, the effort involved. You know, even just filling 10 seats at an event is very difficult. And I think the last 4 years have really fast-tracked us through that engagement process and enabled libraries, archives, museums and universities to really find their way a bit more. The First World War and Second World War are iconic elements of British history and European history. And you know, those are the kind of points of reference in many ways for thinking about what makes you British or European or what have you. So now to kind of infuse that diversity story into there, but one that isn't tokenistic, because it's, if you look at the 1.5 million Indian troops in the army, if you look at you know, the hundreds of thousands from Africa and the Caribbean, the millions, you know, then you start to realise it wasn't a little bit, it was a significant part of that story.
Obviously in the centenary there's been a lot happening where groups are telling similar stories, and getting your story to be noticed and engaged is quite hard. Many of the projects have said that they're really pleased to be part of a national moment, a long moment, 5 years of a moment, But that gives them an opportunity to be very much with other groups, to share those stories and to work with new partners. I've been surprised that more than 120 organisations have done a second project, and lots of them are expressing interest in other stories they've found which are perhaps coming out of the First World War. I think the special element that we've had working with the AHRC Engagement Centres has been that people have a deeper understanding of the stories. They don't necessarily take what they read the first time without interrogating it, thinking about it, and that will be an important legacy. One of the reasons we strongly wanted to do this partnership.
So we worked with many different organisations, locally, regionally and nationally. We worked with the Heritage Lottery Fund, of course, particularly with the regional office here in Birmingham. We worked quite closely with the Imperial War Museum, and they were really helpful.
It was very important to work in partnership during the First World War centenary. This was something that had a huge global impact and was not something which one institution alone could tell the story of. IWM worked with Voices of War and Peace throughout the First World War centenary. We worked to promote their events, to share their resources, to engage different groups and audiences in some of the programmes that they were funding, and we worked together as well to deliver networking events and to attend different openings of projects. We did a lot of work behind the scenes, and a lot of work which was very much about sharing information, so much more about raising awareness of what people were doing, about connecting people, signposting people to Voices resources. Working in partnership with the Voices Centre enabled us to support more organisations and to reach more people. It enabled us to collaborate, to make the most of our resources and to continue to engage people beyond the projects that we were working on individually. It was always good fun working with Nicola and the Voices team, definitely. I attended a number of events that the Voices Centre organised, including the launch of the Kete Buchler exhibition at Birmingham University.
Beyond the Battlefields is an exhibition of photographs by a German female photographer called Kete Buchler. She's relatively unknown both in this country and in Germany, and the exhibition shows images that she took in her home city of Braunschweig during the First World War.
Kete Buchler, or Kathy Buchler, but the German pronunciation is Kete. She was born in 1876 to a, we could say, wealthy bourgeois family in Braunschweig.
Because of her hearing disability, she had a particularly sheltered life, but she was very creative and very caring, very interested in the world around her. So she experimented with painting, watercolours and so forth. But when she married, her husband, Walter, was connected to the Voigtlander camera firm. He gave her a camera, her first camera. She taught herself, just like Christina Broom, the professional British photographer, did, but also she was able to benefit from lessons in Berlin.
It's a wide range of subjects which she was dealing with or which she was interested in. She had the authorization to take photographs from the Red Cross, and because it was not natural and easy that everybody had access to the hospitals, but she had this, being a photographer and being involved in this caring and charity works as well.
She's obviously interested in domestic life, so before the First World War quite a lot of her images were around her own family and their friends and things.
She's such a technically accomplished photographer, and she had a really kind of a, what's the word, a quirky kind of eye, I would say, photographic eye. So some of the pictures she's taken of children dressed as clowns, for instance, or in fancy dress, quite a mischievous, humorous sense of fun.
And the exhibition came about from the curator Matthew Shaw, who used to work for the University of Hertfordshire. He discovered the photographs on a research trip to Germany.
When I arrived, this museum was basically two gatehouses from a former castle that on either side of the road, tiny, probably in area not much bigger than the Bridge Gallery, and yet it has this spectacular reputation. I visited the museum, had a conversation with the director, and was really just leafing through the books that they had for sale, and found this book of Kete Buchler's black and white photographs. Her interests aligned absolutely directly with the interests of the First World War Engagement Centre at the University of Hertfordshire. Had I been a cartoon character, I probably would have spat my false teeth across the room, because I thought, well, that is a no-brainer. You've got to do something with that.
We worked together with the Everyday Lives Centre based at Hertfordshire to bring the photographs from the Museum of Photography in Braunschweig over to this country. It's the first time these photographs have been seen outside of Germany.
The exhibition is drawn from a very large body of negatives, some of which are actually in colour.
So it was quite an undertaking to kind of whittle them down into a smaller number.
I think this exhibition really makes us potentially think differently about the First World War and about the importance of not just seeing the First World War in a military context, not just seeing it in terms of a national context. This is about the stuff of everyday life, and it's about crossing borders and thinking in a much bigger geographical scale.
There are a very large number of people that have come together to make this exhibition happen, both in the UK and obviously in Germany, and building the partnerships which enable that to happen between the centre in Germany and the different centres in the UK. But also then there are teams of both researchers, including early career researchers in the different institutions who've been doing some of the background research. There have also been community groups, so the leaflet which accompanies this draws on community projects that have been exploring different angles, obviously different people in collections who've loaned objects and helped to interpret them. It is very much a team effort to bring something like this together, and hopefully there will be sort of partnerships that will endure beyond the end of this to explore other things and do other exhibitions elsewhere.
I think we're thinking of it actually not as 3 or 4 different shows, but as one show with 4 different runs. And we share a common philosophy, we share a common ethos about what it is to engage with communities, about trying to bring new angles, new questions to the First World War centenary. And in a sense that's been a really enriching experiences, because I've learned a lot from working with the Voices team, and so in that sharing process I think it's actually affected not just the work on this project, but taken ideas back to what we do in other aspects of the centre's work.
It was an unexpected part of the centre's activities actually, and it meant that we had formed a partnership with a museum in Germany, and it was a really fantastic opportunity to work collaboratively with another engagement centre, and we continue to work with them. So it was a fantastic piece of work, and one of the particular highlights I think for me being involved in the centre. It was in a sort of space in the gallery that practically anybody coming into the building will see. And we did lots of evaluation ourselves as well in the space and spoke to people that came to see it. We think there were at least over 50,000 visitors to the exhibition. Certainly there were that number of visitors to the museum at that time, and most of those people would have walked through the space. Because the university was used as a hospital during the First World War, and Katie Buchler took lots of images of injured soldiers in Braunschweig, it made sense to show them at the university in the Rotunda Gallery, which is above the Great Hall in Aston Webb, which was a ward during the First World War. So again, we've complemented it with Birmingham material to show what was happening in the city at that time. And lots of the feedback we had was, obviously people hadn't heard of this particular photographer, but they were blown away by the images. Artistically, they're fantastic images. She's a great photographer. But also the subject matter was fascinating, and we had lots of people say it was just the same for them as it was for us, and made people aware of a side of the university's history that they didn't really know about. And we also did creative output, so again working with research and cultural collections. We organised a pinhole camera workshop. It was open to members of the public to come along and basically try their hand at pinhole photography. In 2017 we ran a series of 5 showcase events. So we held these in Cardiff, Belfast, Glasgow, Newcastle and London, and this was an opportunity for community groups to come along, tell us about their projects and meet other projects. So we tried to move away from them being on university campuses. So again, sort of breaking down that barrier and just making them much more accessible. Today we're in the National Museum Wales in Cardiff, and this is the first of our showcase events that we're running this year. There are presentations usually in the first half of the day. We're going to finish the day with much more of an informal discussion. This is all of the 5 engagement centres together, working together on a series of events where we invite other academic partners, cultural organisations and community organisations to come along, meet with us, tell us about their projects and find out how we can help them. people that we met during those showcases. Some of them were involved in the festivals that took place a couple of years later, or we've continued to sort of be in contact with them.
We organised the Four Nations Festival, which was about celebrating what communities had done. There's one in Birmingham, then there's one in Belfast, Cardiff and Glasgow, with a final event in London. And the aim is to try to capture all the activity that's been going on between academics and communities over the period of the centenary.
The first of which was held here in Birmingham at the Midlands Arts Centre in March 2019. The particular theme of that festival was diversity.
It felt like a real celebration of all the different kinds of work that had gone on. It gave us as a small arts organisation the opportunity to see a real range of different approaches.
We could access space that was suitable for performance. We had film screenings, and then we also had a series of sort of talks and more traditional talks and presentations. We were really, really lucky to have the musician Soweto Kinch. We met with him at the end of 2018, and he told us that he had been commissioned to produce a piece that would be performed as part of the London Jazz Festival, and that he was happy to come and play a sort of early section of this piece at our festival. He was interested in sort of early jazz music, the experience of black soldiers, how they were treated, what happened when they were recruited, and what happened to them during the conflict as well.
100 years ago this year, 100 years ago, 1919, there were race riots up and down the country and across the British Empire and in America as well. So this piece that is evolving gradually and is going to involve 4 incredible dancers and the choreographical genius of Jade Hackett. You're going to see all of that in a bit. But this piece that's evolving is a reflection on that, a meditation on that.
So this was really the highlight, I think, of the Diversity Festival for me. It was an exclusive, nobody had heard this music anywhere before, nobody had seen Soweto perform it, and it finished off the Friday and that first day of the festival perfectly. Because the Midlands Arts Centre is very busy at the weekend anyway, lots of people were coming in on the Saturday that didn't necessarily know about the festival but then became involved. So the atmosphere over the 2 days was fantastic.
We are showing our Empire Soldiers virtual reality installation. So we've got 6 headsets with us, all showing virtual reality films, both the Caribbean story and the South Asian stories. It isn't just restricted to those delegates, those kind of research and historical experts who are coming onto the festival. It's here and it's open for everyone. I will also be, taking away and carrying on some of those conversations that have started here. And again, not just for myself, but for all of us, I think that sharing is a really important part of what we do. We also had
an artist who came and was creating artworks in one of the rooms. People could come and join in. And we had lots of interesting things on display. A ceramics professor who we've worked with based in Manchester brought some work that he had done with a group of refugees based in Stoke. There was also some work on display about Indian soldiers and their experience. And we also had a room that was showing some films on a loop. So a number of community organisations have produced short films as part of their projects. Another part of the festival was the launch of a report called Diverse Stories, a sort of mini project that we had funded through a supplementary funding bid to the HRC. And it was led by another academic at the University of Birmingham, Kevin Myers, and an early career researcher that worked with Kevin, Izzy Mohammed. And they had been working to do research around those BME groups, their experience of the First World War commemorations. Another highlight of the Diversity Festival was the keynote speaker. We were really lucky to have David Olusoga come and open the festival for us.
I've been talking about where we are in 2019 after the centenary, whether the ambitions lots of us had for reimagining and reframing the conflict as a more global and more diverse war, whether we've achieved that. There's still a lot of stuff to be discovered. There's still a lot of stories to be told. There's still things in the archive we haven't brought out into the light.
I've come to Woburn House today on behalf of Striker Light Arts and Heritage to really be present at this AHRC, Arts Humanities Research Council organised event with all of the different centres of research around World War I.
We had over 100 people come, and this event was really an opportunity for the centres to talk about the work that they had been doing. So lots of our community partners were invited along, the funders were there, lots of the other big organisations that we work with came along.
My understanding is to reflect on the past 4 to 5 years worth of centenaries, to
share some best practice on what happened and also to pick up on any lessons going forward, really.
We looked at a very simple idea, bringing 12 children of First World War combatants, British children and grandchildren, and 12 German children of combatants together to live together in Germany for 4 days, and for them to exchange their family stories with each other.
And it was really indicative of what you can achieve if you have the imagination. And the academics who worked with Age Exchange and who worked with these two communities of people was very, very powerful.
We did not think that when those descendants met, which was an extraordinary moment, that this project would ever be 100 years on about reconciliation. But it was. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to you. These are the truths. This is the impact that war has on families, on communities. And I think the best of what's happened during the commemoration has been when those stories have come out and been revealed.
The dominant story is still the dominant story. It's how do you then take these other stories and make them part of a broader, multi-narrative rather than single narrative story of the First World War.
What I've found is a kind of sense of sort of solidarity and a sense of a network, I think, that I don't necessarily know was present before. I feel like we've all come together to sort of really, you know, discover new learning, transfer knowledge, share experiences.
Nicola and Ian have been very much at the forefront of that. I don't get through the door at any of these events without them checking up on me and checking that I'm okay and recommending that I speak to people when they come up.
You get the opportunity to share your mistakes in a kind of supportive atmosphere. When lots of organisations come together and cards on the table, I think it's a real positive thing, and that's what, for me, today is about.
Well, what community groups really valued was the opportunity to meet other community groups or to meet cultural partners or potentially funders. So for us to be able to do that and then be sort of witness to these fantastic conversations and see people form relationships was a really, really satisfying part of being involved in the centre.
And the same applied to each of the other festivals. So that is a really big output.
I didn't think it was going to be the last event, but it's actually the last event. And for me, it's really important that the last one, I think the last one is happening where it all started 128 years ago. So it's great that I was able to sort of bring in Yemen up in the conversation about what it meant to be involved in the First World War and what it means for people today. So the exhibition is taking place in the old print works, which is like an old factory. It's very important for me, it was very important to have it in Bolswell Heath because they're a very, very important Yemeni community who lives here. So we've got pictures that are actually 100 years old. And then we've got Ron's pictures, and then we've got these testimonials with interviews that we shot with people in Aden. We've got a video that we bought from the National Archives that was shot in Aden in 1914. And then we commissioned somebody to go shoot exactly the same place today. We did 14 interviews with Yemenis who live in Birmingham. We've got their portraits and we've got quotes from them. We've got an amazing Yemeni community in Birmingham. Their parents are stuck and their families and their loved ones are stuck in the war. This country is basically funding that war, or at least selling arms that are involved in that war. And so it's absolutely important that we speak about Yemen more. And
as a mother myself, you can't even imagine for your children to be growing up in that kind of environment. I think they touched on it as well, that the children grow up and all they play is war.
It's important to have these kind of exhibitions because you don't know how many people are unaware, and it's civilians here who are from minorities that have come over who may feel their message is not getting heard. They need to find community, they need to find a voice.
This is what I love so much about Voices, is that it always involved, or it always gave priority to other people's opinions and voices. And so it made space, but actually seriously made space, because there's a lot within academia about how we go about co-design and collaborative research, but in reality what academics end up doing is they've got this idea about this amazing thing they want to do and they just do it, and then they bring the community partner and they're like, right, this is it. But actually with this project it actually involved thinking with the community partners about how we want to do things. I'm very grateful for everything I've learned. Ian is my mentor, so he reads my stuff and he basically gives me very honest opinion about my work, and this has been a very important part of my own career development. So beyond the exhibition and me being able to bring these perspectives from the Arab region onto a British context, I've grown up a lot. There's definitely a sense of more people know about this now, more people talk about black soldiers' contributions, more people talk about Muslim soldiers' contributions to the First World War, and so that's definitely a big impact of this project that's been running for 6 years. It already sat quite nicely within the COI's ongoing research. I guess we're just going to go off and continue doing what we're doing.
This sort of community engagement thing has become more and more popular, or people are more aware of it as we've gone on. So to be involved in a project that is primarily focusing on that has been fantastic.
It's more interesting to engage with communities and share your knowledge than it is to go to a conference of academics and present an academic paper. So you're seeing this kind of shift going on about people growing in different ways as a consequence of working differently. And that seems to be a really, really powerful story. That is one we need to just remind people of. You know, we shouldn't lose sight of the success we've had with this model, which is that people have participated, people have produced things, academics have learnt new skills, communities, historians have learnt new skills. So all those positives you have to build on. You have to then step back and say, okay, what are the mechanisms? And I think some of the mechanisms could be building much closer relationships of dialogue between communities and universities is one way. I think it's building into the career structure for young academics, that public engagement is something that they should engage with as part of their career path, and therefore they should get experience of that. Maybe that model can be one that could actually be rolled out on a regional basis, or can be rolled out when other moments of commemoration come along.
In a sense, you're talking about multiple collaborations, because you've got the project and the centre, you've got the project and the community groups, and the best projects work seamlessly across three. If you as a project leader is having a challenging relationship or an unguided relationship, actually I think is quite often the case, it helps if you've got a nice sort of message coming down as well, as this is the sort of thing you should be doing, these are sorts of things we're focusing on, you focus on that too. So for me, actually, it's been very broadly across all relationships, a positive experience.
I think the way the Engagement Centre works, partnering up academics and community groups, for me was personally very gratifying. It was a really good project to be on. I felt very well supported.
The crucial thing for small community organisations, they always made sure we were paid on time, if not in advance, which was very, very helpful. And I think it's that kind of understanding from an academic organisation that's quite rare.
You know, you could connect with people on a national level, and only through having that centre, through having that hub there, I think is it possible. So together with the funding support, I think it really helped us to tap into a wider network of people that are interested in this history, and that went beyond, you know, the university or the museum's own circles, really.
I think the centre has been very democratic in the way that it's worked, and that it's attempted to bring in people, not academics, but also to make sure that the voices are heard of the groups that have participated in these various projects.
Those who participated in this project, some had a knowledge of the First World War, many didn't, and those that did, war was war. You know, war was Flanders Field, it was trenches, it was mud. It wasn't that actually war has a much bigger effect than that. And many more different people participate in it than just the soldier in the trench.
It's really good to see the different organisations come together that have a different slant on how they deal with, how they research, how they treat the stories that they come across and how they share them.
Clearly there's been a level of engagement across age ranges, across different black and ethnic minority communities, and touching on important issues such as, you know, gender and sexuality.
I've been able to engage with other groups, other communities, so we can start working on how we continue to
create a platform for the narratives that are being unearthed.
I think Britain has rather compartmentalised the First World War. You know, the narrative of victory, the narrative of empire, and I think there are quite a few projects which have taken place which I wouldn't say were against that narrative per se, but they wanted to go deeper. They wanted to kind of get the stories out there that, you know, who were these people? And I have to say, it's been a bit like reclaiming our ancestors.
The community groups who've gone through the process, all those people have become really talented, non-academic, but actually doing academic work researchers, citizen historians and so forth. Is okay, what do they do next? And what is the role of the university in supporting them to achieve what they want to do?
The centenary in the round has been a worthwhile experience. It has brought hidden histories out into the open. My own project, for example, has put a lot of stuff online. So there's a conversation to be had about how all that is preserved going forward.
There's a lot of new knowledge that's emerged, and I think a lot of people are thinking, what do we do with it? Where does it go so it becomes part of a wider narrative? How does it get disseminated?
Some of the legacy of the Voices Centre will be the resources that they were creating. So I know that they are working on resources which collect some of the lessons learned, which sum up the work that they've been doing, and which share those for new audiences and people looking to do similar work in the future. I definitely think the Voices Centre was a success. I think it was a real proof of the success of that funding from the AHRC, and supporting community historians to work alongside academic historians is one of the most positive lessons, I think, from that, and I hope that it continues.
Ian and I have recently written a paper on the kind of processes around it, which is really interesting to me. And I quite like that there have been lots of challenges. There's lots of areas where universities need to do much, much better in terms of engaging with community groups. I sort of feel I've developed a real understanding of that through this project. So in terms of my career, it's been a fantastic opportunity. And also I've got to work with some really interesting and nice people on their projects, mainly in Birmingham, but also across the country. These groups are friends now. They're not just, you know, colleagues or people that I've worked with. And hopefully those relationships will continue once the project finishes.
None of this would have happened without the support from the AHRC, from the advice we got from the AHRC and the Heritage Lottery Fund, from key people who work in those organisations who are passionate about this initiative being successful, the academics who joined the centres early on and stayed through all the way and continued to deliver on the agendas that were set and agreed with them, and also the people I worked with in the other centres and with Nicola, who I've worked with now for 6 years. Those are strong relationships that will continue.